astonishingly simple, then don't do it that way. If we do not have the ability to screen this out, you know, I was struck by the fact that people are aghast that they might not be able to carry on the dozens of carry-on bags. You know, if you go into certain department stores, I forget which one it is in New York, the employees come in with little clear plastic bags. I mean, we're willing to subject employees at department stores to protect the designer shoes, and the employees come in clear plastic bags. There are ways around this, and we have to admit that.
Mary, I'm sorry to have to cut you off. We really appreciate the information you've given us today, but we got to cut in and go to a news conference that the mayor of the city of New York is holding right now. Let's drop in there. Thanks for your time.
That's right. Let's go right now to that press conference. New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani speaking now.
Process that we're following. That is, when the medical examiner is able to identify the remains as a body, then they'll be identified, they'll be numbered basically for identification. We have 94 of those. 94 where we have bodies for identification. 46 of those 94 have actually been identified. And then we have the gruesome and horrible situation that in many cases we recover only parts of bodies. And we have 70 category. So there's 94 bodies, 70 body parts. And I'm sorry that I have to describe it that way, but that's unfortunately the situation that we're facing. We have 4,763 people on the missing persons list. That's a list that's as inclusive as we can make it. It includes the plane itself, the manifest. It includes people that have been identified to us by family members. It includes the information we've been able to glean from businesses who are looking for people that they believed were working and they haven't been able to make contact with. But that's the list that we're working with right now. It could turn out that we recover fewer than that. It could be more. We don't know the answer to that yet. We have set up now a permanent family center at the Armory on Lexington Avenue and 26th Street. It began operating at 8 a.m. This morning, and it will continue to operate until midnight tonight, and then it will operate every single day. Yesterday, we registered over 2,000 families, and therefore, if you are looking for someone that you believe is missing as a result of the attack on the World Trade Center, that's the place to come to register, to bring identifying data, and we'll do everything we can to help you. The city is still closed, 14th Street South. Our objective today is to try to get it open, a good deal of it open, for midnight tonight, literally, really for tomorrow morning. And we will be working to open it down to Canal Street, and then to open also other selected areas so we can create corridors into the Wall Street area. We'll continue to keep West Street closed all the way down. We'll continue to keep probably a street parallel to West Street closed, and possibly the FDR Drive. We're not sure yet. But tomorrow the city will be open, certainly down to Canal Street, and then selected portions further down. And obviously a lot of the work today will be designed to try to get that done by midnight tonight. There are a number of other things, but I'm sure it'll come up in the questions. Again, I want to thank very much the governor and the state and the federal government. We finished our meeting this morning, and were able to coordinate many things that would be impossible.
We have been listening to New York Mayor Rudolph Giuliani, who has been giving us some updated numbers right now which show the situation that the recovery workers there are now facing. He says that they are working now with a list of 4,763 missing persons. That number includes the people who are on the planes, people who are in businesses, and other family members who have been calling in looking for folks who they believe were in that area. They have recovered 94 bodies, and they have them identified, right, or numbered to be identified. 94 bodies numbered. 46 of them have already been identified. And they now have, as he says, 70 different body parts that they are working for. Those are grim figures, to be sure. And we will keep an eye on, an ear open for the new information on that as it does come out. But for now, let us go to London. And CNN's Christiane Amanpour, who's standing by now for more live coverage. Christiane?
Well, Leon, good afternoon from London. As you know, the United States has been trying to marshal its allies, both political and potentially military support, in dealing with what happened in the United States on Tuesday. The allies have been calling this an attack not just on the United States, but also on the whole of the civilized and democratic world. Joining us now from Paris is the French President Jacques Chirac, who is giving his first interview on this matter. Mr. President, thank you for joining us from France. Can you say now to the American people, to the American president, that you and that France stands foursquare, fully committed behind what the U.S. plans to do and what the U.S. is going through right now?
Vous savez, le peuple français a été véritablement traumatisé par ces événements. Une infinie tristesse, une immense émotion. La violence, des images d'abord, ces photos d'hommes, de femmes, d'enfants, cherchant un être cher disparu,
they loved who disappeared, and showing us their despair and their fear. All of that has touched the French people profoundly. And in fact, there was just a poll that was made in France, and it showed that 96% of the French people show total solidarity for the French people and for the American people and the American authorities. I have never, ever remembered such a unanimity as far as solidarity was concerned. And also, everybody's asking themselves why. How can one answer this question? This kind of madness, this absurdity, this cruelty. And there's no way that one can justify this kind of behavior. And of course, the French people, yes, the French people show total solidarity for the American people.
Mr. President, the United States is trying to build a coalition of allies and of other nations to take sides and act and stand up and be counted on this side of this battle, as they call it. NATO yesterday, for the first time in its history, invoked a clause in its treaty that says an attack on one nation is an attack on all nations. What, in your mind, does that mean for France as it ponders supporting the United States in its response to this? What will France do?
First of all, the Americans are not trying to. I mean, they have certainly obtained unanimity around them in this struggle against terrorism. And it's particularly true with regard to NATO. And, in fact, that was demonstrated last night at the meeting that took place, the NATO meeting that took place last night. And in fact, I had already talked about it with President Bush, who'd called me 1 or 2 hours beforehand. And I, of course, confirmed that we also would show solidarity with regard to the introduction of Article 5 in the North Atlantic Treaty. And of course, that means that France certainly will show solidarity to the Americans. And of course, all NATO countries have done so, and I imagine almost all countries throughout the world.
Mr. President, can I press you on that? France was part of the Gulf War Coalition. France was part of the Balkan Coalition. If the United States decides that it has intelligence that leads it to take military action, will France contribute to that military action in any way?
France, I'd like to repeat, will be totally supportive. We will show our solidarity. Of course, we'll have to examine the situation. We'll have to see who's culpable. And after all, in the United States, a great effort is being made, and I think, in fact, it's being done very efficiently. You're trying to search, trying to look at all the various indices, and trying to determine precisely, specifically, who is at the origin of this murdering folly. And once we found, then of course France will stand with the United States.
The United States president has described this as an attack, basically a battle between good and evil, and that the United States will win this battle and that good will eventually triumph. Do you see it in those terms?
I have no doubt for a single moment that terrorism, which is always based on fanaticism, blindness and madness, terrorism certainly does represent in today's world evil. And, of course, we must win over it with the greatest of energy.
Do you see this, Mr. President, as a clash of civilizations, of not just an attack on the United States or on democracies, but something even more profound?
I won't talk about shock to civilization, because after all it would mean that a certain type of civilization could adopt terrorism as a means, as a normal and natural means of expression, as a kind of culture. I don't want to envisage that anyone, that any human being organized within a civilization could adopt such a stance. And so therefore I believe that terrorism really represents the action of results of certain civilizations. And so therefore I believe that it's got to be considered as being an aberration that's got to be removed from worldwide civilization, which of course has to respect human rights.
You and other world leaders, including, of course, the United States, have described what happened here as a monumental atrocity. But, of course, many people in some parts of the world have said that this is an attack on elements of U.S. foreign policy. It's no secret that France has sometimes been at odds with the U.S. over aspects of foreign policy. Will that cause any obstacles to you and to France as you consider joining a coalition and taking any measures that the United States and allies deem necessary?
Well, one doesn't necessarily have to be always in agreement on everything, because after all, that's a typical characteristic within all families, and we're talking about international family as all families. However, on the other hand, there's one area where there can be no difference of opinion, where there can be no divergence, and that is the need to fight against this perverse illness, this vice, which is terrorism, represented in terrorism. And of course, in that area, there's absolutely no divergence, no difference with regard to the attitude of France, with regard to the attitude of all civilized countries, whatever their religious, their economic, their philosophical backgrounds, and United States.
Mr. President, one final question.
And in fact, I also
Do you
know
think
that almost all... May I just ask one last question?
Do you believe that
Yes, I'm
military response will be necessary, that this act of terrorism has forced the hand of not only the United States, but the rest of the allies and democracies who've said that they must stand united against this?
The United States was targeted, has been targeted, and the United States has been the first victim of this phenomenon, in which the whole world, in fact, is involved. But the United States is the first victim. And so it's for the United States, and it's what the United States is doing, to determine from whence comes this attack. And then, when that has been done, then the necessary things will have to be done to try to eradicate this evil. And of course, France will certainly be at its side. The means that will be deployed by the Americans, well, it's not for me to prejudge that. It's up to the United States to decide that. But what I can say to you is that as far as eradicating terrorism, as far as fighting against terrorism, France, as I am sure most countries throughout the world, we will only show solidarity to the Americans.
President Jacques Chirac of France, thank you very much for joining us on CNN today.
All right, thank you very much, Christiane Amanpour, with that live interview with French President Jacques Chirac. Now, before we went into that interview, we kind of cut short some of the information that we were relaying to you that we had called from New York Mayor Rudolph Giuliani's press conference. He was announcing some of the latest information that they've been able to pull together about the grim and, in some cases, really gut-wrenching task of recovering bodies from the rubble down there in Lower Manhattan. And here is the latest information that we have from the mayor. There are 4,763 on the missing persons list at this particular time. Now, that number includes the people who were on the planes, as well as any people that may have been working in businesses down there, as well as people that who have called in, families who have called in to notify authorities that they have people from their families they believe may be down in Lower Manhattan. Now, to this point, rescue workers have recovered 94 bodies that they have numbered for identification. 94 bodies have been recovered, and of those 94, 46 of them have been identified. That means that they have now left, at this particular point, the mayor says, 70 body parts in addition to the remaining bodies that have got to be identified. They've got 70 body parts to deal with. Now, the mayor also went on to note that the Omni Hotel at Washington Avenue has been set up as a family service center, and so far they've got some 2,000 families registered there. Now, if you think that you need to be among those families who are registered there, if you're trying to find out about the whereabouts of loved ones you have not heard from for the past 48 hours, you need to go to the Omni Hotel at Washington Avenue and register there. Now, as far as the city streets and the areas, then the businesses down in Manhattan and maybe near that area, we understand that right now the mayor says everything is open down to Canal Street, and that parts of Lower Manhattan have been closed for the past 48 hours may be opening perhaps as early as midnight tonight or tomorrow morning. And of course, we'll update you on any more information we get regarding all of that.
That we will. And Leon, of course, New York City is ground central for the rescue operations, but this is affecting the entire country. And if you stay with us, folks, here on CNN, we're going to keep you up to date on all that, including your travel plans. First of all, we want to tell you about the Pentagon. The Pentagon is returning to full operations today. It's 2 days after that hijacked plane slammed into the nation's military center. Almost all 24,000 employees are expected back on the job today at the Pentagon. Half the building is still closed because of smoke and structural damage. Workers are doubling up in offices, and there too there is a grim task of searching for victims. That goes on there. The investigation into the attacks is unfolding on several fronts, including flight schools in Florida. Investigators are looking at the records of some students that were trained at the flight schools. They may have been involved in the hijackings. One of them is the same man who rented a car that's been impounded at Boston's Logan Airport. Sources say that car contained materials helpful in the investigation, including flight manuals that were written in Arabic. And as you know, of course, the two planes that slammed into the World Trade Center were hijacked from Logan Airport. Now, speaking of airports, we are expecting an announcement any moment now from Transportation Secretary Norman Mineta on air travel. The Department of Transportation says that U.S. airspace will be reopened in the next hour. Earlier today, all 3 New York area airports reopened on a limited basis. That's according to a New York Port Authority spokesman. He, though, gave no indication of how many flights would be allowed in and out of New York. Airports and airlines are working with the FAA to make sure that new security procedures are in place, which is a good reminder, Leon. You know, people are stuck across the country looking forward to getting home. But even when the airports open and the airlines resume service, it's just not going to be like it used to be. It's going to take some time to get where you're going.
That's right, but it'll still be the first big step towards getting things back to normal across the country.
A step back toward that.
All right, let's step back now up to New York, and Paula is standing by. Paula?
Hi, Darren. Hi, Leon. Leon, I was struck by the numbers you just shared with us coming out of that Mayor Giuliani news conference. I think what is striking about the numbers that you mentioned, particularly the missing persons numbers, is how much they have changed in just a 2.5-hour period of time. You mentioned that so far, 4,763 people are considered missing. That is up over 1,000 from what the mayor had reported earlier this morning. Now, we have some new information in from the fire commissioner of New York City. He is commenting on reports that there has been some contact from the rubble from a New York City Fire Department fireman. And he can't confirm the exact nature of that contact. They are still treating this particular case as a rescue, not a recovery. There is still hope more bodies will be found, or more people will be pulled out of the wreckage alive. You might remember yesterday, it seems like a complete miracle that 11 people were pulled from this wreckage. 6 firefighters, 3 police officers, 2 civilians. Right now I'm going to check in with Michael LeCoux, who just about a half hour ago gave us a stunning view of just how devastating this attack was in New York. Now, Michael, before you go any further, you need to establish for us, when you show us pictures of these cars, if these cars were parked blocks away from what was once the World Trade Center complex, or if they've actually been pulled out from the wreckage.
Paul, I didn't quite think I understood all of your question, but yes, these cars were pulled from very close to ground zero. And if you look at the image that we've first given you, it certainly looks like the images of a war zone. And in fact, that's what it must have been. Indeed, what you were looking at is a car that was pulled out from somewhere close to what was the World Trade Center, someplace very close to the Twin Towers, just a few blocks south of where we are right now, just a few blocks south in what was ground zero. This car here, we believe, was probably a police car, because if you can look at the front dashboard, you can see the radio display at the computer terminal, or what was once a computer terminal, and a computer keyboard. We also found some police reports in the car. So it's unclear, of course, whether this car was a vehicle that had been stationed there, or whether this person or the crew that was driving this car were responding to the scene. If you look just down past here, you'll see 2 cars. And from this vantage point, you can get a really good sense, I think, of the impact, the profound impact of this blast. Unrecognizable, other than the fact that you can see what was once an engine completely covered in debris and soot, and what was once a wheel. Obviously, these were steel radio belted wheels, and now what is left are just the stringy wires around the rim of this thing. You know, as I've been spending some time down on this street, which has become a pretty important artery, we've been seeing rescue workers coming in and out, some of the new rescue workers who are relieving the folks who have been working all night, some of them arm in arm, hands over each other's shoulders, clearly getting very emotional about this. A lot of pedestrians have walked by this street, and they stop whenever they see these vehicles, which were obviously pulled so that the rescue workers can continue doing their very good work. And they look at these vehicles with complete incredulity. I see many of them standing there, sometimes 2 and 3 at a time, friends or family who obviously live in the neighborhood, looking at these cars, gazing, and I think this cars, seeing the shell of these cars is giving a lot of people, at least the people who live here, and maybe some of our viewers at home, just a very true sense of what the impact must have been like, and what it must have been like to be one of the many thousands of people who were there when the impact first occurred. Just down here we have a car that's in slightly better shape, but tells a story in its own way. Maybe it was a few blocks farther away, farther north, slightly further away from the impact. And as you can see on its front window, the word scrawled W-A-R, war, because I suppose that's what it feels like. Paula?
Boy, I'll tell you, it's going to take a while for anybody to digest the images you're seeing now. Michael, I know it is very difficult to get any information out of rescue workers now. Obviously, everybody's working so hard to try to perhaps even rescue folks at this time. Have you been given any information from paramedics about what is going on at Ground Zero?
Well, what we've heard right now is that people are working tirelessly. They're working in very long shifts, that they're getting very emotionally involved in what they're finding. I'm trying not to be gruesome about this, but to be very accurate, frankly, about it. They're finding more body parts than they're actually finding bodies. And some of the rescue workers, obviously getting very emotionally attached to this particular task, say that they're concerned that they may not be, there are some people who may never be identified, whose entire bodies may never be found. We've also talked to somebody who's been intimately involved in the rescue and search effort, who tells us that they found what they believe to be at least one of the wheels of one of the planes that crashed into the Twin Towers 4 blocks away from where the Twin Towers were. So again, that gives you a sense of what the impact was like. And there's no telling what else we may find within this perimeter. It's interesting, the rescue workers are working right inside what you would call ground zero, or the heart of the explosion and the blast. But when you talk to more rescue workers and you talk to police officers and other local authorities here, they will tell you that the damage that was sustained by that blast spread many blocks beyond that. And I think just telling you that the wheel of one of the planes, what they believe to be one of the planes, being found blocks away, gives you some sense of that.
Michael, can you tell us if the smoke seems any thicker down there now? From our platform here, it appears as though, and I know the winds have shifted a little bit, that the plume is even larger than an hour ago.
Right. Well, I can tell you this much. It may be because I'm getting used to this, which is probably bad news, but it doesn't quite feel the way that it felt even just 30 minutes ago. It's constantly changing. I'm going to ask William if you could just swing by and look up here. We are underneath essentially what has become a very recognizable plume of smoke. You can see this from just about any place in Manhattan right now. In fact, you can see it from New Jersey. You can see it from parts of the other boroughs outside of Manhattan, from Brooklyn to Queens. And what I can tell you is that it's been very interesting. Again, one of the many vehicles that pass us as we've been standing here for the past hour or so. What I can tell you is that it doesn't feel as severe as it was. It smelled very much like you were standing in the middle of the embers of a bonfire. No longer smells that way. The colors of this cloud seem to change by the minute. Just moments ago, it was a very thick black, and now it looks like a white, sort of grayish, as if you're almost flying through the clouds in the air. Paula?
All right, thank you, Michael. Put that mask on. I know that the health workers down there are advising all of you that are in that close to put the mask on. Before we go back to Atlanta, I wanted to share something with you that some of you might find disturbing. Because the winds have shifted, some of the wreckage is blowing to parts of Manhattan, even a couple of miles away from here. Peter Stiles is a correspondent of ours. He lives, we are told, about 2.5 miles from here. I wanted to share with you some of the paperwork that ended up blowing into his yard. You will see this sheet is just simple notes, maybe with some phone numbers. This is an order slip from Cantor Fitzgerald, which is a bond company that was housed in one of the 3 buildings that collapsed. This particular piece of paper probably will sicken many of you. It is a sheet explaining health coverage from employees, explaining that early retirees' health coverage cannot be terminated. And this last sheet I'm going to share with you that blew up into the yard of Peter Stiles is an actual list of a list of participants in a deferred vested benefit plan, actually listing 10 or 11 people who had vested interests at this point, even describing the value of those benefits. Once again, people all over Manhattan are reporting smelling smoke stronger than they have smelled over the last 48 hours. The schools are indeed open today. All public schools, that is, at least, in the majority of the parochial schools. And once again, we are told that the stock exchanges may open as early as tomorrow. If they don't open tomorrow, they will open on Monday. The city is working very hard to clear some of the arteries moving south of here. You can't even get down to Wall Street now because many of these streets are being used as a staging area for the rescue efforts. So, Leon, that's what I've got for now. And, you know, I don't know what your reaction was to this paperwork, but I know that it got an awful lot of people here.
Boy, I can tell you my immediate reaction was a bit of a twinge in the gut to see something like that. It really puts a human face on what happened just more than 48 hours ago. Thanks, Paula. Well, Paula mentioned how difficult travel is around New York. We know travel around the country has been nearly impossible for many. What you're looking at now is a live picture that we have set up from the Department of Transportation, and we're expecting any minute now the Secretary of Transportation, Norm Mineta, is going to be coming out and announcing that there will be a reopening of the airports across the country under certain guidelines and certain conditions. And we'll get more information on that when that press conference gets underway, and we'll get there live. Well, actually, we may end up having to stick around for a couple of minutes. Nothing? No, apparently we do not have a press conference right now. We were going to be having another guest, but that's going to have to be delayed for just a moment. Darren, over to you.
That's how it happens when we have live television. We'll get to that guest. Very important topic to talk about. How do we talk to our kids about what has taken place and how do you keep them from being scared? Someone who knows a lot about that, father of two, also one of our best correspondents here at CNN, Marty Savage, is in New York City, made his way up there, and brings us more coverage from there. Martin.
You hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. We can't see you, though. There you are.
All right, there we are. Well, let me tell you exactly what is going on right now. And there is an intensive search and rescue effort that is underway. Specifically, though, we are hearing reports it is focusing on an individual, a survivor, who is believed to be trapped in the sub-basement underneath of Building 1. We know more details about this, but I am right now hesitant to tell them to you because I don't want to give families out there, thousands of families, any false hope. But at this particular point, we know that this person has been communicating with authorities over a cell phone, was heard most recently, we were told, by a rescuer at about 4:30 this morning. Now, the problem is there's tons and tons of steel trapped over this specific position, and the effort right now is to try to lift that steel out of the way. We saw a short while ago an army of iron workers that have come in. They have joined the throng of rescuers on site here, and they are literally cutting away piece by piece the pieces that made up the Twin Towers. Now, we've been showing you the automobiles, we've been showing you the pieces of paper, but quite frankly, if you want the most graphic depiction of what has transpired on the tragedy, walk to the end of the block down here. Twin 110-story buildings now have been reduced to a pile of rubble that stands about 100 feet tall. That is the clearest example of the devastation that has been visited on New York City here. And as the workers try to go in and do their job there, many of them now are putting on rappelling harnesses. They are using ropes because they are literally attaching themselves to any strong points that they can find because that pile is so loose and so capable of shifting. So they use these harnesses, attach themselves, and clamber down much like mountain climbers. They do not believe that any survivors are now going to be found above ground. They have been certain.
Marty, I'm sorry, we're going to have to interrupt you. We'll get back to you in a moment. Want to take our viewers to Pennsylvania. This is an FBI news conference, the latest on United Airlines Flight 93.
As we've talked about yesterday and we'll continue to talk about until it's resolved, the other priority that we're working on is the black box, the voice recorder. As of right now, it has not been located. We're confident that we're going to keep working on it and we will account for it. And as I said, that is the other investigative, that's the investigative priority right now, is to locate that. We're still doing the grid searches. We're working on covering the entire crime scene, and we'll go wherever the evidence leads us. There has been a lot of questions regarding the flight path. There's an awful lot of information out there. We have determined that the flight was heading in an eastern direction, and that's coming from the NTSB. Beyond that, anything else would be speculative on our part, and we really don't want to go any further than that, but we will confirm that the plane was heading in an easterly direction. That's coming from the NTSB. To give you a little bit of an idea, of how we're operating up there. One of the questions to us has been how many agencies are up there and who are they. One of the things, we have tremendous amount of agencies that are up there with personnel, and it fluctuates on a daily basis depending on the needs of that day. What we've been doing is who's ever up there, they have their own meetings and their own objectives, whatever the organization is, whether it be the Red Cross trying to get enough food for the workers and for you, all the way to any leads that are being generated from the state police or the FBI or any other federal law enforcement. All the different agencies are up there trying to work and do the job what they're here for. They're meeting, all the heads of the different agencies that are up for that particular day meet twice. They meet at 9 a.m. and they meet at 2 p.m. And basically they go around the room and everybody talks about what it is that they've accomplished and what it is that they're working on. And then at that point, the people who need to know have a good idea of how things are working, how things are funneling, so we have a clue what's going on and people know what's happening here on this site. Now that's only for this site. And as you're well aware, the FBI alone has over 4,000 agents working not only nationwide but worldwide, trying to track down any leads. It's an awful lot of information. Anything of an investigative nature that will be released out of Washington, D.C., most likely from either the Attorney General or the President or the Director of the FBI. We're focused here on what's going on here on a day-to-day basis. That's what we hope to convey to you with our press conferences that we're going to have twice daily. And that's what we're focusing on. There's been a lot of questions regarding the crater itself. According to people who have been involved in these investigations, such as the NTSB and the state police, when the plane goes in on the ground, there's a tendency obviously for an awful lot of dirt to be moved and dust. As you can tell from the roads around here.
We've been listening in on an FBI news conference, the latest on the crash of United Airlines Flight 93. That's the one that was on its way from Newark to San Francisco when it crashed on Tuesday morning. Still have not recovered the black box, yet they're still hopeful they will find it. The grid process goes on, and they also had more information that the NTSB saying that they do know at this point that that plane was headed in an easterly direction when it crashed. More information on that just ahead. Right now, here's Leon.
Well, actually, I'd like to, I hate to do this over the air, but I must ask the producers. I just now see that Transportation Secretary Norman Mineta is now at the podium. We want to hear what he has to say right now.
In order to restore our security to the fullest extent possible, we exercise the necessary precautions while assessing our nation's transportation systems. Now I am pleased to announce some good news for travelers, for our economy, and for the restoration of America's freedom of mobility. Effective 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time today, our national airspace system will reopen to commercial aviation. At this moment, the FAA reports that we have airports starting to reopen across the country. Now, this decision was made after a series of meetings throughout the day, yesterday, and late into Wednesday night, with the White House and other cabinet officials, Federal Aviation Administrator Jane Garvey and her great team, aviation industry leaders, as well as intelligence and law enforcement representatives. I must caution everyone that a system as diverse and complex as ours cannot be brought up instantly. And so we will be reopening airports and airlines will be resuming their flights as they meet the new security measures that we are now imposing. Additional airports will be opened only after they meet the new stringent security measures. Anyone planning on flying today, or not even today, but henceforth,
I only recommend that you contact the number that I gave you. People are en route. As we've been told that people are en route. That's coming from United Airlines, and they are supposed to go to that location, the Seven Springs Resort location, and that would be your best bet on where to get information on the families.
Is anybody coordinating access to the families? Otherwise, it's going to be 50 media representatives.
That is going to be coordinated through United Airlines.
I apologize for the switch in the audio there of that transmission we were getting from the Department of Transportation. Unfortunately, that was not under our control. We did get the top of the report there that Transportation Secretary Norm Mineta has announced that the skies over America will begin opening as of 11 a.m. Eastern Time. The process of reopening is going to be a gradual one because he says that with a system as diverse and as broad as the one that exists here in the U.S., it can't be done instantaneously. As a matter of fact, I think we now have the audio problem straightened up. Let's go back to that report.
Will take place before passengers are allowed to board any aircraft. We have discontinued off-airport check-in and curbside check-in at the airport. All passengers will be required to go to the ticket counters to check in. We must reserve boarding areas for passengers only, and only ticketed passengers will be allowed to proceed past airport screeners. And all vehicles near airport terminals will be monitored more closely. We experienced an unprecedented assault on our commercial aviation system. And in times such as these, we will use all available resources to ensure the safety of our travelers. Agents from the Department of Justice and from the Department of Treasury will be deployed to airports across the country. The added presence of these officers will augment our existing heightened security procedures, serving as a visible reminder of our strong commitment to protect the safety of the American people and the traveling public. Again, I strongly urge all passengers to allow plenty of time to deal with the heightened security procedures and also to exercise patience with airport and airline employees and security personnel. Finally, let me say this. From this day forward, we are operating with tightened security. In the weeks and months ahead, we will do all that we can to ensure that the safety of the American aviation system is in place. We will not allow this enemy to win the war by restricting our freedom of mobility. I wish again to express my hope that all Americans will heed the President's call to keep the victims and their families in our prayers and our thoughts as we go about the task of recovering and rebuilding. I will now take questions.
What is the situation now with general aviation, with business aviation, and the cargo carriers?
First of all, the cargo carriers are not being differentiated from the commercial passenger airliners. There are certain requirements being put on them in terms of security and safety measures, but they are back in the air again effective 11 a.m. On private or general aviation, rather, I will have a little more on that subject later this day. But right now, this is a announcement only as it relates to the commercial and cargo airline.
As of 11 a.m., you can't go out and hop in your Cessna and take off?
No, sir.
Okay.
Mr. Secretary,
Mr. Secretary, some say...
We've been listening to the Transportation Secretary, Norm Mineta, and make the announcement that things in the skies over America will be getting back to normal sometime fairly soon. He announced that the airports and airlines will begin the process of going back to regular service. He did announce, though, a number of restrictions that passengers should expect to now have to endure. Number one, them being off-airport and curbside check-in will no longer be allowed. The boarding areas at all airports will only be accessible for ticketed passengers only. And all vehicles that are near terminals are going to be monitored more closely. And he's also advising that passengers allow for plenty of extra time now for these added security measures, and he's also asking for extra patience, which is no doubt going to be needed. We'll continue to monitor that and bring you any other new developments that come out on that angle. But we want to move on and get to an angle of this that we've been trying to get to for some time now, and that is, what do you do with your children, or the children in your family that may be trying to deal with, or in their minds grapple with what has happened here, the tragedy that hit this country on Tuesday. We're joined this morning by Dr. Alvin Poussaint, who's been standing by very patiently, I should add, with us in Boston, Massachusetts this morning. And Doctor, thank you very much for bearing with us through the different breaking news that we've had today and yesterday, as a matter of fact, as well. We're very glad to have you, and because most of us in this building have a lot of respect, and we are very familiar with your work on this topic and dealing with children over the years. And I want to ask you, first of all, do you suggest that parents actually engage children on this issue, even if they have, the children that is, even if the children have not begun to ask questions on their own?
Not with very young children. In fact, I think children below the age of 7 probably shouldn't even be watching these events on television. But unfortunately, many, many young children did, because the parents had the television sets on because they were so anxious to follow the events, and the children saw a lot of the atrocities and the tragedy and the violence associated with what happened, and were very, very terrified and fearful. In those cases, the parents have to reassure those children and make them feel safe, and try to explain to them. The children will have questions about what's going on, what's happening, and they have to tell them the truth, that some angry people who are angry against the United States committed this awful act and blew up the buildings and killed people and injured people, but to also then reassure them that they are safe. Children will very quickly personalize these types of tragedies, and they'll wonder whether someone's going to blow up their schools, someone's going to blow up their building in their town, whether their parents are safe going to work. So they're going to have a lot of fear and anxiety.
Well, let me ask you, since you go to that point, you hit two things I do want to talk to you about. Number one, schools. Number two, well, let's begin with this one first of all. How do you approach a child with that, and talk to him about the things like that you just mentioned, the vulnerabilities that their parents may have when they go to work, or what may happen to them when they go to school? How do you talk to a child about that and avoid instilling some sense of victimhood?
Well, I think that one of the things is that the society is not completely safe, and parents already teach their children how to protect themselves. We did a lot of that after the school shootings and so on. So many of them know that things are not completely safe. So I think in this situation, you tell them, just like you did after the school shootings, that you're trying to make everything as safe as possible for them, that the government is, the FBI is, the aviation industry is, and that you are safe. And also, particularly for children outside of New York and Washington, that it's nothing like that is likely to happen to them.
Well, Doctor, I'm sorry to interrupt. I want to cut you off because it sounds like your microphone just fell off. I want to give you a chance to find it and pick it up, because I want people to hear this point that you're making. And folks, you have to understand, here we go, man. This is live television, and this is the kind of thing that does happen from time to time. So I want to let you begin at that remark again, Doctor, because I think it's very important. The idea of what it is that you're supposed to be talking to children about who don't live in New York, children who are outside of the areas of Washington or D.C. or New York where these things have happened.
Yeah, the children who live outside, I think you can tell them they're relatively safe. They haven't experienced it directly like the children have in Washington, D.C., in New York, who I think are suffering another level of trauma because of it, and another level of fear. So they're going to need even more attention, just like the adults there are suffering from a lot of losses and grief. Yeah. I think children who live in other parts of the country, you can pretty much reassure them that they're safe, and that the government is doing all that they can and will track down the perpetrators, and this is not likely to happen in their community, and then give them a lot of support, a lot of family spirit, togetherness, and it will help them. Well, I know there are children already who have been watching these events on television and have had nightmares and are very, very anxious about what might happen to them. But I think with support from the family and so on, that this will pass and they'll be okay.
Wise words. We
but it will take some time. Also, schools can do things. Some children want to feel like they're able to help. You know, if they wrote some poems, if they had some art drawings and so on that they made for the families or to the victims and so on, it gives them a chance to show that they also care, and I think helps to relieve a lot of the grief and pain that they're feeling.
Dr. Alvin Poussaint, we thank you very much for bearing with us this morning. We appreciate your words of wisdom. We certainly hope that they have been digested out there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, let's go now from Boston up to New York and Paula.
All right, Leon. As you know, there's a lot of new information coming in, and we're all kind of scrambling. I wanted to alert you to the fact that very shortly, Governor Pataki of New York, Mayor Giuliani of New York City, and the President will be holding a conference call. We have every reason to believe we're going to be able to show you that. We're going to be able to eavesdrop in on that conversation, legally, of course, I might add. But as we wait for that call to get underway, I just want to quickly bring you up to date on what is going on in this part of the country. We have some pictures now of Kennedy Airport, which will show for you that they are opening up to limited service. And you just heard Transportation Director Mineta describing how travelers, if they choose to travel over the next couple of weeks, well, forever, I guess we're told, they will see increased security. That's not apparent from these pictures, but clearly the airports, in order to open up to this kind of service, have to put into effect some new security guidelines. Mr. Mineta mentioned that there will be no longer will there be any curbside check-in. Only ticketed passengers will be allowed through security. No knives of any kind will be allowed to be taken on board. In addition to that, there is going to be a much higher standard used for employing security personnel. In addition to this, we're just beginning to get a sense of the scale of the tragedy witnessed here in New York City. The mayor of New York City confirming that some 4,763 people are on the missing list. Some 94 bodies have been recovered so far, not all of those identified. Right now, I'm going to check in with Kelly Wallace, who is standing by at the White House. Kelly, we haven't heard much about what the president has been doing today. Can you fill us in on that?
Absolutely. Just like yourself, Paula, we are waiting. We know the president expected to make a telephone call. We were told to Mayor Giuliani, you adding more information there, that Governor Pataki will be joining that call. The president really to say that the full weight of the government is out there to help New York City, Pennsylvania, certainly the Pentagon, deal with search and rescue operations. We know, Paula, the president was in the Oval Office shortly after 7 a.m., getting his daily national security and intelligence briefings. He also, Paula, has been working the phones, continuing to build what this White House has been calling an international coalition against terrorism. He called the Prime Minister of Japan, the Prime Minister of Italy, Lord Robertson of NATO, and Crown Prince Abdullah of Saudi Arabia. Ari Fleischer, the president's spokesman, saying all four, expressing their condolences and sympathies to the American people, and also saying that all four stand united against terrorism. Paula, you've heard us. We've been reporting that the White House trying to build this sort of international consensus. Reporters pressing Ari Fleischer to say, what is the U.S. government asking of these countries? Is the U.S. asking for military assistance, economic assistance, to place sanctions against any country? When and if the U.S. retaliates, Fleischer would not respond, but he said it's more than rhetoric that the U.S. is asking for support from these countries. We also know, Paula, the president will be going to a local hospital in the Washington, D.C. area later this morning to visit with some of the families of the victims affected by, obviously, the plane crash at the Pentagon, and to thank the doctors and nurses who are helping the victims. And Paula, as you've been reporting, there was some interesting information that also came out from Ari Fleischer concerning Air Force One. We, of course, were told by the White House yesterday that the White House had real and credible, those are the words in the White House was using, information that the White House and Air Force One were targets of these hijackers. A report in today's New York Times, Karl Rove, one of the president's top political advisors, telling the New York Times that there was a telephone threat that came into Air Force One as the president was leaving Sarasota, Florida, and as that plane was in the air. Karl Rove telling the New York Times that that threat was deemed credible, and therefore that is why the president went off to a military base in Louisiana and then to Nebraska. Ari Fleischer telling us again that that information is correct. Ari Fleischer saying that this caller told whoever the person talking to that Air Force One is a target. Ari Fleischer was asked if the caller used the code name for Air Force One, and he said the caller did in fact use that code name, and that is why White House officials deemed this a credible threat and why that plane was rerouted to Louisiana. And one other, I know we're throwing a lot at you all, one other piece of information, Paula. President will be declaring today that tomorrow should be a national day of prayer and remembrance. The president will be going and attending a local church service here in Washington, and at that point in time he will be asking Americans on their lunch hours tomorrow to go to a church, a synagogue, a mosque, and to pray for the victims and their families of the tragedy facing the United States. Paula, back to you.
Kelly, I wanted to go back to a point you made much earlier on, and you were talking about the efforts underway at the White House and the kinds of phone calls are being made to establish even greater support for the United States. I think Colin Powell made it very clear to me in an interview yesterday that in order to fight this kind of terrorism, that the United States is going to have to build even stronger bridges that is, with friendly nations. I don't know whether you got to hear Christiane Amanpour's interview with Jacques Chirac, but she asked him a pointed question about France not necessarily always being in 100% agreement with some United States policies, and asked him the extent to which France would continue to be involved with fighting terrorism. And he basically said that they're going to have to see how this thing proceeds, but obviously offered the backing of the French government. Can you give us any analysis of the level of support the president expects from Western European nations?
Well, I think Ari Fleischer was sort of asked that. I did not hear Christiane Amanpour's interview, but we were sort of asking Ari Fleischer exactly why is sort of the U.S. trying to build this international consensus? Does it feel it needs that before it takes any military action if it decides to take such action? And Fleischer said that looking at the UN Security Council, that it passing a resolution condemning this, saying that the attacks against the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, really were attacks against the security of the United States, and that affects the entire world. So the situation, the magnitude of the situation, you get the sense from White House officials because of the number of victims, because of the World Trade Center, the Pentagon being attacked, that this administration is reaching out and that getting more support than maybe it has in previous cases because of the magnitude of the situation. And you're also getting the sense here, Paula, that again, it's not clear what the U.S. is asking for, if it's asking for additional military support, if it's asking for countries like France to join together and slam sanctions against a country if a country is deemed responsible to support any terrorism. Not clear what the U.S. is asking for, but it's clear that the administration is trying to determine who is responsible, but it is also sort of looking at this opportunity to take a stronger, maybe more of a long-term battle against terrorism and trying to sort of build that international coalition to make sure that those responsible are taken out, if you will, but also to make sure that something like this never happens again. So the gravity of the situation seems to be why the U.S. is expecting and counting on the support of really the entire world. Paula?
Kelly, any reaction there to the news conference some Pakistani officials held earlier today? Pakistanis, or at least the officials at least, showing great regret about what happened in this attack, saying they clearly, in their words, are against terrorism. And yet, no one should forget that Pakistan is one of 3 governments that actually recognizes the Taliban government, the religious group now in charge of Afghanistan. Any reaction to that at all?
Well, that is exactly why it is significant. We don't really have any new reaction to that latest briefing. We do know that the U.S. ambassador to Pakistan met with General Musharraf, the military leader of Pakistan, today, coming out of that meeting, saying that the general sort of gave a very positive statement, a strong statement, that Pakistan stands with the United States. That is significant for just the reasons you mentioned, that Pakistan, and I believe it's the United Arab Emirates and one other country, only 3 that recognize the Taliban as sort of the ruling government of Afghanistan. So it's very significant because if Pakistan is sort of stepping back, it means that Afghanistan could be further isolated. And obviously, if the U.S. government determines that Osama bin Laden or his network were involved in this and that the Taliban might be providing safe haven for Osama bin Laden, well then Afghanistan losing the support of the Pakistanis there. Paula, back to you.
All right, Kelly, I'm just going to quickly fill in some time here before this conference call gets underway between the governor of New York and the mayor of New York City with the president. We have just gotten information that LaGuardia Airport, which is one of the 3 airports that has just opened, is now being evacuated. We have no idea what that means, and as soon as we get more information on that, we'll bring it to you. Of course, you heard Transportation Secretary Mineta talking about the new security guidelines that will be in place in airports across the nation. Here's the president picking up the phone, talking to New York's top leaders.
Yeah, thank you all very much for taking my phone call. First of all, I can't tell you how sad I am and America is for the people of New York City and the tri-state area. I want to let you know there's a quiet anger in America that really is real. And also, though, I can't tell you how proud I am of the good citizens of your part of the world.